Sweetheart, why don't you cover this one? Consider it a test.
Sweetheart, why don't you cover this one? Consider it a test. Diane Ashworth slid the black leather bill folder across the white tablecloth with 2 manicured fingers, as though touching it any longer might soil her hand. The crystal glasses caught the candlelight. The other diners at La Belmont pretended not to watch, the way wealthy people always pretend not to watch a public execution they secretly enjoy. Claire Donovan looked down at the folder. Inside sat a bill for $1,140. Richard Ashworth leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a thin smile on his face. Beside him, his son Nathaniel opened his mouth to object, but his mother's hand landed gently on his forearm. A warning: let the girl embarrass herself. Whitney Sterling, seated across the table in a burgundy dress that cost more than Claire's monthly rent, didn't even bother hiding her smirk. She had been waiting 3 weeks for exactly this moment. "We just want to know," Diane said sweetly, "if you can actually keep up with this family. Waitresses don't usually eat at places like this. They serve at them." Claire reached into her small clutch, pulled out a plain black card with no logo, no name embossed in gold, nothing that announced anything at all, and set it on top of the folder. Nobody in that dining room had any idea that the woman they were mocking could have bought the restaurant, the block it sat on, and the parking garage across the street without checking her balance. Before the night was over, the Ashworth family would learn exactly who they had been laughing at, and the card that was never supposed to work would end up teaching all of them a lesson none of them would forget. It all started 3 months earlier, on an ordinary Tuesday shift, when a rich man's son wandered into the wrong restaurant and fell in love with the wrong girl. Except she wasn't wrong at all. They just didn't know who she really was. Claire Donovan had grown up in a world most people only saw in magazines. Her grandfather, Walter Donovan, had built a hotel empire from a single roadside motel in Ohio, and Claire was his only grandchild. Before she took her place in the company, he made her one promise, disguised as a warning. "I will not hand you a kingdom you never learned to serve in." So Claire spent her days waiting tables at Rosie's Diner, under her mother's maiden name, no assistants, no corporate card, living on tips in a studio apartment above a hardware store. That was where Nathaniel Ashworth found her, on a rainy Tuesday morning, his car broken down 2 blocks away. He ordered black coffee and eggs, and when Claire spilled water on his sleeve, he laughed instead of complaining. "You're new," he said, glancing at the name tag that read only Claire. "2 years in," she replied. "Feels new," he said, and smiled in a way that made her forget, for just a moment, that she was supposed to be invisible. He came back the next morning, and the one after that. By the 3rd week, he was ordering the same thing before she even asked, just to have a reason to sit at her counter a little longer. "You always this quiet with regulars?" he asked one morning, watching her wipe down the counter for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "You always this observant with waitresses?" she shot back. He grinned. "Only the ones who make me forget my coffee's getting cold." 6 weeks in, he waited outside in the rain for 20 minutes so he could walk her home. No umbrella, hands in his pockets, soaked through by the time she locked up. I asked him why he hadn't just texted. He said some things were worth getting wet for. Neither of them knew that morning in the rain that Nathaniel's last name carried its own kind of weight, or that his family had very specific ideas about the kind of woman he was allowed to bring home. The first dinner invitation came a month later. Claire arrived at the Ashworth estate in the nicest dress she owned, which was nowhere near nice enough by their standards. Diane greeted her with a smile that never reached her eyes. It was the coat that told Claire everything she needed to know. She had just stepped through the front door, shrugging out of her jacket, when Richard Ashworth walked past without looking at her once. He simply held out his own coat, expecting her to take it. "Just hang it in the closet by the stairs," he said, already checking his phone. Claire stood there for a second, coat in hand, waiting for him to realize his mistake. He never did. Nathaniel, catching the moment from across the room, crossed quickly and took the coat from her himself. "Dad," he said, voice tight. "This is Claire, my girlfriend." Richard glanced up, blinked once, and offered a thin, unbothered smile. "My mistake." He didn't apologize. He simply walked away, as if the moment hadn't happened at all. Diane appeared a moment later, smoothing over the silence with a laugh that had no warmth in it. "Honestly, The help wears such similar colors these days. It's an easy mistake. Claire said nothing. She hung her own coat up herself. Over the following weeks, the comments never stopped, only sharpened. Diane asked, in front of guests, whether Claire had ever considered a more suitable line of work. Whitney made a habit of dropping designer names into conversation, then feigning surprise at Claire's silence, as though confusion were a confession. Claire never argued back. She had spent 2 years learning patience from tired customers and demanding managers, and none of it compared to an evening with the Ashworths. But every small cruelty stayed with her, filed away, not for revenge, but because Walter had taught her that the way people treated someone they believed had nothing revealed everything about their character. What none of the Ashworths realized was that the quiet waitress, absorbing every insult without complaint, had grown up watching her grandfather build an empire out of exactly the kind of humility they mistook for weakness. Not everyone in the Ashworth family treated Claire the way Diane and Richard did. Eleanor Ashworth, Nathaniel's grandmother, found Claire alone on the back porch during that same first dinner, escaping the noise. "You're the waitress," Eleanor said, easing herself into the chair beside her. "I am," Claire said, bracing for another comment about her job. Instead, Eleanor smiled. "My husband and I ran a diner for 11 years before Richard's father made his first real estate deal. Everyone in that house seems to have forgotten that." From that evening on, Eleanor made a point of sitting beside Claire at every family gathering, asking about her shifts, her regular customers, the ache in her feet after a double. She never asked about money or background, only about Claire herself, which was more than anyone else in that family had offered. What Claire didn't know was that Eleanor was carrying her own quiet burden. Her husband had passed 18 months earlier, and her health had begun slipping in ways she hid from her son and grandson, refusing to become, in her words, one more thing this family has to manage. She scheduled her own doctor's appointments in secret and drove herself, alone, because asking for help felt like losing the last piece of independence she had left. One evening, Claire found her gripping the porch railing, pale and unsteady. Without hesitation, Claire helped her inside, sat with her until the color returned to her face, and never mentioned it to another soul in the family. "You didn't have to do that," Eleanor said quietly. "Neither did you," Claire replied. "The porch, every dinner, you didn't have to be kind to me either." Eleanor took her hand. "Kindness was never a have-to for me, dear. It's the only thing worth being remembered for." Neither of them knew that this quiet friendship, built in stolen moments away from the rest of the family, would matter more than either of them could imagine before the year was over. Whitney Sterling had expected Claire to disappear within a month, but Claire didn't leave, and worse, Nathaniel seemed to fall for her harder, with every dinner Whitney tried to ruin. By the 3rd month, amusement had curdled into something colder. Whitney had grown up assuming she would eventually marry into the Ashworth name, and watching a diner waitress take that future from her felt less like heartbreak and more like theft. She started with small things. A rumor at the country club that Claire had been fired from a previous job for stealing tips. Then, one Thursday evening, she called Diane directly. "I just think," Whitney said, keeping her voice light, "that if the family really got a look at who this girl is, away from Nathaniel, you'd see what I see." "What exactly am I supposed to be seeing, Whitney?" Diane asked. "That she's playing a part. Nobody works 2 years at a diner without a plan, Diane. Girls like that don't fall into money by accident. They aim for it." Diane was quiet for a moment. "You think she's after Nathaniel's inheritance?" "I think," Whitney said carefully, "that the only way to know for sure is to test her somewhere she can't fake her way through. Somewhere expensive, somewhere real." Diane's silence stretched, and Whitney knew she'd won. "Le Belmont," Diane finally said. "Richard's celebrating the new deal there next week anyway. We'll make it a family dinner, and if she can't keep up, then Nathaniel sees exactly what the rest of us already have." Whitney hung up smiling. She had spent weeks planting doubt, and now she'd handed Diane the exact stage she needed to bring it into the open. What Whitney didn't know, and what Diane certainly didn't know, was that the woman they were preparing to embarrass had grown up watching her grandfather handle far more dangerous people than a jealous socialite and an overprotective mother, and she had learned from the best exactly how to stay calm while the truth did all the work for her. The dinner at Le Belmont was, on paper, a celebration of Richard's newest real estate deal. In reality, it was an ambush. and everyone at the table except Claire and Nathaniel knew it. The mockery started early and built steadily, exactly as the opening of this story described. Diane's comment about Claire, keeping up with the family, Whitney's performance of concern disguised as cruelty, Richard's silent amusement, arms crossed, watching a woman he'd already decided didn't belong. Then came the bill. Diane slid the folder across the table with a smile that had been rehearsed for days. "Consider it a test," she said again, watching Claire's face for the panic she was certain would follow. It never came. Claire set her plain black card on the folder without a flicker of hesitation. The waiter, a young man named Marcus, who had been quietly uncomfortable serving this table all evening, took it and disappeared toward the register. 90 seconds later, he returned, and something in his expression had changed entirely. He set the receipt down, glanced at Claire with something between confusion and recognition, and said quietly, "Thank you, Ms. Donovan. Always a pleasure." The table went silent. "Donovan?" Whitney repeated, her voice suddenly thin. Nathaniel looked at Claire, genuinely confused for the first time since he'd met her. "Claire, what is he talking about?" Claire had known this moment would come eventually. She simply hadn't expected it to arrive at the hands of the people trying to humiliate her. She folded her napkin, set it beside her plate, and spoke calmly. "My name is Claire Donovan. My grandfather is Walter Donovan. And yes, that Donovan. I've spent the last 2 years working at Rosie's Diner, because he asked me to learn the business from the ground up before I ever step into a boardroom." She looked directly at Diane. "You were never testing whether I could afford dinner. You were testing whether I'd let you humiliate me for it. I just didn't feel like failing that test the way you wanted." Richard's face had gone pale, and Diane's mouth opened and closed without sound. And Whitney, who had spent months orchestrating exactly this kind of exposure, suddenly understood she had exposed the wrong person. But even as the truth settled over the table, a new problem was already forming. Because within the hour, Whitney would make one last desperate move, one designed to plant a seed of doubt in Nathaniel's mind before the truth could fully take root. And for a few painful days, it would very nearly work. 2 days after the dinner, Whitney found Nathaniel alone at his office. "Doesn't it bother you," she said softly, "that she let you fall for her without ever telling you the truth? Maybe she was only ever slumming it until something better came along." The words shouldn't have worked. But doubt is patient, and it found the one crack in Nathaniel that pride always leaves behind. He didn't call Claire that night, or the next. It was Eleanor who finally intervened, sitting Nathaniel down in the same porch chair where Claire had once helped her steady herself. "She kept your family's secrets about how you all treated her," Eleanor said quietly. "She never once used what she knew to hurt any of you, even when she had every reason to. Ask yourself honestly, grandson, if she'd told you on day one, would you have believed she loved you for you, or would you have always wondered?" That question changed everything. Donovan Hospitality Group's annual anniversary gala took place the following week. When Walter Donovan took the stage, he told the room that the next leader of the company had spent 2 years working at a diner most guests had never heard of, learning what it meant to serve before she asked anyone to serve her. Then he called Claire to the stage, and the Ashworth family, seated near the front, watched in stunned silence as the woman they'd mocked over a bill walked up to thunderous applause as heir to one of the largest hospitality companies in the country. The consequences came in the days that followed, and this time, the Ashworths were there to feel them directly. Richard sat across from Claire and Walter in a downtown conference room a week later, pitching Brookline Tower for a Donovan renovation contract his firm had spent months chasing. He'd built the pitch assuming his son's engagement would carry weight in the room. Instead, Walter simply turned to Claire. "This one's yours to decide." Claire reviewed the numbers, then looked up at her father-in-law, calm and direct. "Your bid is solid, Richard. But Hendricks Construction offered us the same terms 2 weeks ago, without needing a wedding to get in the door." She slid the folder back across the table. "We're going with Hendricks." Richard said nothing. There was no argument left to make. Whitney's reckoning was quieter, but no less real. At the next country club luncheon, she found her usual table of friends already seated, already deep in conversation, and no chair left open for her. Margaret Ellsworth, who had spent a decade following Whitney's lead on everything from seating charts to gossip, glanced up without warmth. "We heard about the rumors, Whitney," Margaret said simply. "About Claire. About the tips story. Turns out none of it was true. Whitney opened her mouth to explain, and found, for the first time, that no one at the table was interested in listening. Nathaniel proposed 6 months later, on the back porch of the Ashworth estate, in the same chair where Eleanor had once told Claire that kindness was never a have-to. He didn't do it at a gala or in front of cameras. He did it quietly, at sunset, with only Eleanor watching from the kitchen window, tears already falling before Claire even said yes. I don't need the company, Nathaniel told her, kneeling with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I never did. I just need you to keep letting me walk you home in the rain. Claire laughed through tears and said yes before he even finished the sentence. Diane and Richard, humbled by the gala and the months that followed, slowly began rebuilding a relationship with Claire, this time built on something closer to respect than performance. Diane never fully lost her sharp edges, but she stopped aiming them at her daughter-in-law, and eventually, that had to be enough. The wedding took place the following spring in the garden of Walter's original motel, restored now as a small boutique property, exactly where Claire's grandfather had started everything decades earlier. Eleanor walked Claire down the aisle herself, refusing a wheelchair despite her family's protests, insisting she would walk this one on her own terms. As the ceremony began, a quiet commotion stirred near the back of the garden. Whitney Sterling stood at the edge of the guests, uninvited, dressed simply, none of her old confidence intact. I shouldn't be here, she said softly when Claire noticed her. Claire studied her for a long moment, then walked over, guests holding their breath. I lost almost everything trying to make sure you lost something first, Whitney admitted, voice breaking. I'm sorry. Claire hugged her, briefly, without anger. I hope you find whatever it is you were actually looking for. It was never him, and it was never money either. Whitney nodded and slipped away before the ceremony resumed. Later that evening, as guests danced beneath string lights, Nathaniel reached for Claire's hand and pressed something small and cool into her palm. She looked down. It was her card, the plain black one. No logo, no name, the same one that had sat on a bill folder at Le Belmont 10 months earlier. You left it at the house after the gala, he said. I've been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment to give it back. Claire turned it over in her fingers, laughing softly. You do know I have others. I know, he said, smiling. This one just means something now. She slipped it into her clutch and pulled him back toward the dance floor. Somewhere in the world, people are still being judged by their job title, their clothes, or the car they drive. But this story is a reminder that true worth was never something anyone else could see on a receipt. It was something Claire had been carrying all along, long before anyone in that dining room ever knew her name. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment telling me what you would have done in Claire's position, and subscribe for more emotional true-to-life stories that remind us what really matters. And if you thought this story was powerful, wait until you hear the next one, because it might just break your heart in a different way.